64 AD, Nero needed a scapegoat, so he lit Rome on fire and blamed the Christians. In the weeks that followed, he turned the city into a slaughterhouse. Matthias sawn in half, Luke hanged from an olive tree, Aristarchus and Trophimus burned alive as human torches, Ananias crushed under stones, Paul beheaded, and Peter crucified upside down. 7 men and a season of pure evil. What Rome did to the last eyewitnesses of Jesus will break your heart. The world softens the cost of following Jesus. We won't. From the Roman arenas to the unspoken persecutions of Christians today, Mrs. O and the Martyrs brings you the unfiltered story of millions who counted everything lost for the cause of Christ. I'm Nat. Let's remember their courage and deepen our faith together. Nero was born on December 37 AD in Antium, modern Anzio, Italy, as Lucius Domitius Anhenobarbus. His father, Gnaeus Domitius Anhenobarbus, was a consul, the highest elected public official, serving as a joint head of state, and was infamous for his cruelty. His mother, Agrippina the Younger, was the sister of the Emperor Caligula. Nero's early life was marked by instability. His father died when he was 3, and Caligula exiled Agrippina to Pontine Islands because she was part of a failed plot to assassinate him with her sister and their lover. Leaving Nero in the care of his aunt, in 49 AD, Agrippina married Emperor Claudius, who adopted Nero in 50 AD, renaming him Claudius Caesar Drusus Germanicus. At just 16, Nero ascended to the throne in 54 AD after Claudius's death, widely suspected to be poisoning by Agrippina, one of the most infamous conspiracies in Roman history. Agrippina the Younger, Nero's mum, was a formidable character in Roman politics. She wielded significant influence after marrying Claudius, her uncle no less, and managed to convince him to adopt Nero as his heir over his own biological son. By 54 AD, Claudius regretted his decision and started expressing favor to restoring his son Britannicus as the primary heir. Tensions arose and threatened Agrippina's ambitions. Sources claim she had a pattern of eliminating rivals, with rumors swirling around the death of her second husband, who was allegedly poisoned too, leaving her a great wealth which funded her political shenanigans. She was a regular black widow. The poisoning of Claudius occurred on October 13th during a banquet. He was known for his gluttony and had a particular love for Boletus mushrooms. According to sources, she had a single deadly death cap mushroom laced in his dish. Erin Patterson, anybody? For those of you who are not aware, she was recently found guilty of murdering her in-laws and the pastor's wife with a beef Wellington laced with a death cap mushroom here in Australia. The toxin was designed to act slowly, causing initial symptoms. However, he did not die. Agrippina panicked and called the imperial physician, who allegedly inserted a poisoned feather into his throat under the guise of inducing vomiting. To cover the crime up, Agrippina delayed announcing his death, claiming he was recovering while she consolidated her power. Claudius' son Britannicus and his sisters were locked up as she worked tirelessly to ensure the Praetorian Guard's loyalty was only to Nero. After his death, Claudius was deified, and Nero is said to have joked about this, calling mushrooms, quote, the food of gods. Initially, Nero showed promise. He reduced taxes, improved judicial fairness, and invested in infrastructure, including harbors and grain distribution. He was passionate about the arts, performing as a poet, musician, and actor, which scandalized the Roman elite, who viewed such activities as beneath an emperor's dignity. His obsession with public performances and chariot racing alienated the aristocracy. Nero's reign darkened by 55 AD after he allegedly followed in his mother's footsteps by poisoning his stepbrother Braticanus, securing his power. In 59 AD, he orchestrated the murder of his mother Agrippina after she opposed his affair with Poppaea Sabina. Nero divorced his first wife, Octavia, in 62 AD and married the aforementioned Poppaea in AD 62. However, less than 3 years later, she died while pregnant, possibly by abuse from Nero. In the sweltering summer of 64 AD, Rome, the eternal city and heart of the empire that spanned from Britain to Egypt, faced one of its greatest calamities, the Great Fire of Rome. This inferno not only reshaped the physical landscape, but also ignited political intrigue and religious persecutions. The fire erupted on the evening of July 18th in the densely populated southeastern end of Circus Maximus, the massive chariot racing stadium. Shops and stalls were packed with people, and the area was crammed with flammable goods like oils, fabrics, and timber. It was a tinderbox in the overcrowded slums of Rome with over 1 million people. Most of the homes were built of wood and thatch, and the narrow, winding streets facilitated the fire's rapid spread. The dry summer and strong winds also exacerbated the conditions. Fires were common in Rome, and the first fire brigade was established under Augustus. However, this fire escalated quickly, overwhelming the firefighters who had inadequate resources to manage the flames. The blaze raged for 6 days, consuming large swaths of the city before it was contained, only to reignite for another 3 days, totaling 9 days of utter destruction. Imperial palaces like Palatine Hill, Capitoline Hill's home of the Roman temples, and the Forum Romanum, the political and commercial center, was devastated. The human toll was immense. Thousands perished in the flames, hundreds more were trampled to death, and thousands died from smoke inhalation. Although exact numbers are unknown, historians speculate that hundreds of thousands of people died in the succeeding days. Countless more were left homeless, exacerbating social unrest in a city already strained by the grain shortages and class divides. At the time of the fire, Nero was allegedly not in Rome, but at his villa in Antium, about 35 miles or 55 kilometers away, and rushed back on hearing the news. Rumors immediately started swirling that he, in fact, watched the fire from Equiline Hill, where he played the lyre and sang about the fall of Troy. And some accounts claim he was positively giddy. Nero fiddled while Rome burned. To deflect blame, Nero scapegoated the emerging Christian community, labeling them as arsonists and, quote, haters of mankind, unquote, for their refusal to worship Roman gods. This led to one of the darkest and most horrific periods in history. Christians were crucified, mauled by beasts in arenas, set ablaze as human torches to light Nero's garden, and the fires is a direct link to the martyrdoms of the beloved apostles Paul and Peter. Christianity was a small but growing sect in Rome during Nero's reign. Viewed with suspicion by authorities as a subversive Jewish offshoot, Christians' refusal to worship Roman gods or the emperor as divine fueled distrust, especially among the elite. According to the Roman historian Tacitus in his Annals 15.44, Nero blamed Christians for the fire to quell rumors that he was responsible. Tacitus describes the persecutions as follows, quote, Christians were arrested in large numbers, convicted not so much for arson, but for hatred of the human race, odium generis humani, unquote, a charge reflecting their perceived rejection of Roman social norms. Punishments were brutal and public. Christians were crucified, burned alive as human torches to light Nero's gardens, or torn apart by wild animals in the arena. Tacitus notes that these cruelties stirred pity among some Romans as the punishment seemed excessive and driven by Nero's need to deflect blame rather than evidence of guilt. This persecution, occurring around 64 to 65 AD, was one of the earliest documented state-sponsored attacks on Christians in the Roman Empire. It sets a precedent for later persecutions under emperors like Domitian and Diocletian. Matthias the Apostle was the one chosen to replace Judas Iscariot after his betrayal of Jesus Christ and his death. His name means God's gift. He was a follower of Jesus during his ministry, present from the baptism of John the Baptist to the resurrection of Jesus. He was chosen as one of the 12 when the Apostle Peter cast lots. He was selected over Joseph Barsabas, Justus. He preached the gospel after Pentecost in Judea, Cappadocia, modern-day Turkey, the Caspian Sea, modern-day Georgia or Armenia, and the Kingdom of Axum, modern-day Ethiopia. He was martyred in Jerusalem after being accused by Jewish authorities of preaching Christ. He was stoned and beheaded in AD 60, which falls under the reign of Nero, however, before the Great Fire of Rome. The Apostle Peter, known as Cephas, meaning rock, and Simon Peter, was one of the leading apostles of Jesus and a foundational leader in the early Christian church. He was a fisherman who, with his brother Andrew, was called to be a disciple by Jesus, who gave him the name Cephas when Jesus told him, "On this rock will I build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it." And he is considered among the first of the apostles due to his prominence. He, along with James and the apostle John, went with Jesus up to either Mount Hermon or Mount Tabor and witnessed the transfiguration. He was an impulsive person who often put his foot in his mouth, something I do all the time. He denied Christ 3 times prior to Jesus being crucified. After this denial and resurrection of Jesus, Peter was restored. As a leader of the early church, he preached at Pentecost, performed miracles, and the sick would lay on the side of the road. So as his shadow fell on them, they would be healed. After Pentecost, Peter led the church alongside James and traveled to Antioch and Rome doing missionary work, preaching the gospel and spreading Christianity among the Jews and Gentiles. After the Great Fire of Rome, hundreds of ordinary Christians were arrested. At this stage, Peter was still free and continued to lead the underground church in Rome, and he would hide in the catacombs or in the house of Senator Pudens on the Viminal Hill. Nero's persecutions intensified after the Piceno conspiracy failed, a conspiracy hatched by the Roman elite who hated Nero after the fire. It was a plot aimed to remove Nero from power by assassinating him and establishing Piso, a wealthy, charismatic aristocrat from one of the oldest families in Rome, as emperor. They planned on the 19th of April 64 AD, during the Circus Maximus, as Nero left the imperial box to greet the crowd. Flavius Cavinus, a senator, would stab him with a special dagger hidden in his toga. However, the plot was foiled the day before as a nervous co-conspirator named Epicharis attempted to recruit a naval officer named Proculus into the plan. He refused and she was promptly arrested. Even though she was tortured, she refused to give them any information. However, the Senator Flavius was not as brave. He acted suspiciously for days prior to the plot, sharpened his dagger in front of his servants, and one of them reported this to Nero. Nero arrested Flavius and his friend Antonius Natalis, and under torture, the friend cracked and named Piso as the head of the plot. Nero's revenge was swift and merciless. Many senators were executed, and Christians again were targeted, and this time the Apostle Paul was rearrested. In the apocryphal book, The Acts of Peter, they state Peter decided to flee Rome, and on the Appian Way, he met the risen Jesus walking towards the city of Rome. When Peter asked, "Lord, where are you going?" the Lord said, "I'm going to Rome to be crucified." Ashamed, Peter turned back to Rome and was arrested. This is not recorded in the Bible, and although widely quoted through the centuries, It is debated whether this actually happened. Peter was martyred in Rome at the circus of Nero. When Peter was sentenced to death, he requested to be crucified upside down, saying he was unworthy to die in the same manner as Jesus. After preaching on the cross, he expired. The Apostle Paul, also known as Saul of Tarsus, was a pivotal person in the early Christian church. Known as the Apostle of the Gentiles, originally named Saul, he was a Pharisee from Tarsus in Cilicia, educated under Gamaliel, and was a Roman citizen. As Saul, he zealously pursued Christians and witnessed the martyrdom of Stephen when the clothes of the first martyr were placed at his feet. He had a dramatic conversion on the way to Damascus, where the Lord appeared to him and asked, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? This event transformed him into a fervent apostle of Jesus. Though not one of the 12 apostles, he was called an apostle by the Lord Jesus. Paul's ministry dominated the New Testament of the Bible, and in the book of Acts, his missionary journeys were detailed by Luke, who traveled with him as they journeyed across Asia Minor, Greece, and beyond. He established churches for the Gentiles, and his epistles are Romans, 1 Corinthians, 2 Corinthians, Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, 1 Thessalonians, 2 Thessalonians, 1 Timothy, 2 Timothy, Titus, and Philemon. He worked closely with Barnabas, Silas, Timothy, and Luke. His missionary work took him to Antioch, Ephesus, Corinth, and Rome. He preached the gospel to both Jews and Gentiles, often facing stark oppression from Jewish leaders and Roman officials. Eventually, he was placed under house arrest in Rome. Paul was martyred at the site Tre Fontaine, Three Fountains, in Rome. He was beheaded, a method of execution reserved for Roman citizens. Much like the Apostle Peter, he was beheaded after the Great Fire of Rome. Two of Nero's esquires, Vergio and Parthemus, were sent to give Paul the death sentence. When they arrived at Paul's, they asked him to pray that they might believe in Jesus. Paul told them they should believe and be baptized at his sepulchre. After this, the soldiers led him out to the city to be executed. After Paul prayed, he kneeled and gave his neck to the sword. Luke, the evangelist and author of the Gospel of Luke and the book of Acts, was a significant figure in the early church. He was a companion of the Apostle Paul, who called Luke the beloved physician, and a fellow worker who accompanied Paul on parts of his missionary journey to Philippi, Troas, and Rome. After Paul's death, Luke preached primarily in Greece, but also Asia Minor, Egypt, and possibly Italy. He remained unmarried, dedicating himself to the gospel, and is credited with spreading Christianity among many of the Gentiles. Luke was martyred between AD 70 and 84 in Thebes, central Greece, for preaching the gospel by pagans and local authorities who opposed his conversions. Luke was crucified on an olive tree. Some sources claim he was tortured and flayed before his death. Other prominent members of the church martyred by Nero was Erastus Chamberlain, the city treasurer of Corinth. Although there is little detail of his death, it was likely through burning or being mauled by wild beasts. Aristarchus, the Macedonian from Thessalonica, was a companion of the Apostle Paul, accompanying him on many of his journeys, whom Paul referred to as, quote, his fellow prisoner and, quote, his fellow companion. He too was a victim of the brutality of Nero and was martyred by beheading between AD 64 and 70. Trophimus, an Ephesian, was converted by the Apostle Paul and was beheaded concurrently or shortly after Paul's execution. Ananias, the bishop of Damascus, who assisted Paul after his road to Damascus encounter and healed his sight after Paul was blinded, was subjected to the wickedness of Nero too. And although his manner of death is not recorded, he is counted as one who suffered and was martyred under the brutal campaign of Nero towards the Christians. By the spring of 68 AD, Nero, only 30 years old, was utterly done. In less than 12 months, everything had collapsed, and the Senate had formally declared him hostis publicus, a public enemy. The Praetorian Guard abandoned him, and he fled the Palatine Palace. He rode a mule barefoot, wearing a shabby cloak and a wide-brimmed hat to hide his face through the back streets of Rome, eventually hiding out in a modest villa outside Rome on the Via Salaria. The Senate condemned him to death, quote, according to ancient custom, unquote, to be stripped naked, headlocked in a wooden fork, and flogged to death. Nero panicked and repeatedly tried to stab himself in the throat with a dagger, but couldn't bring himself to do it. He begged his companions to kill him, and they refused. At dawn on the 9th of June, 68 AD, he heard the soldiers approaching the villa. He finally pressed the dagger to his throat and cried out the words that have echoed ever since. What an artist the world is losing, or what an artist dies in me. 2,000 years later, the marble palaces Nero built to glorify himself are buried beneath parking lots and tourist cafes, his golden statue gone. But walk outside Rome at night, look up at the sky, and you will see 1,000,000 tiny lights, each one a life that traces its hope to a handful of men and women who stood in this very city, wrapped in pitch-soaked tunics, and chose to burn for a moment rather than deny their King, Jesus, forever. They did not shout curses at the darkness. They sang. They did not save Rome from the fire. They became a different kind of fire, one no emperor could put out. Peter crucified upside down, Paul, the apostle of the Gentiles, still teaching us the way today. And every time someone anywhere whispers, Jesus is Lord, in the face of fear, the words of the fisherman and the former persecutor give strength to the brethren who chose to love not their lives unto death. 2,000 years later, because the torch Nero lit to mock them, they have become lights in this world. The empire is dust, the cross still stands, and the martyrs, they won. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe and join me for the next chapter of the Martyrs. God bless.